Good evening, everyone. Look at that, and the microphone works. Well, welcome to West Park High School. It is terrific to have you all here. And I just want to say we're glad to have you at Crops and Cul-de-Sacs. For those of you who are here in person, it's great to see you in person. For those of you who are online, thank you for joining us online. I am Bonnie Gore. I'm a Placer County Supervisor representing West Roseville and Central Roseville, as well as the Dry Creek and Alberta areas in Placer County. And before we get started this evening, if you would all join me, we're going to start with a flag salute, which we do with a lot of our meetings. So flag is over here to your right. And if you've got a hat, if you would mind taking that off, and we'll start with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Terrific, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to a couple of folks. We want to say thank you to Becky Guzman. She is the principal of West Park High School. Isn't this a beautiful place? A lot of us have not had a chance to be here, so we really appreciate the high school allowing us to gather this evening. I also want to say thank you to Pete Constant. He is a school board member with the Roseville Joint Union High School District, and he helped us with a lot of coordination of the event. I also want to say thank you to our exhibitors over here. Folks from Placer County, thank you so much for being here. We had folks from Denio's Farmers Market, Sierra College. I did not know Sierra College had an ag program. If you didn't know that and you always wanted to learn a little bit more about what to do with ag, Sierra College is a great resource. We also have the Placer County Mosquito Vector Control District, the Placer County Air Pollution Control District, Placer County Conservation Program, the Placer County Resource Conservation District, Placer County Water Agency, a lot of Placer counties, Placer Land Trust, the Placer County Farm Bureau, Placer County Vintners, Placer Grown, and Placer County 4-H. So thank you all for being here, and hopefully they'll stick around and you'll have a chance to say hello to them after we wrap up. So just a few, we're going to give them a round of applause again. Thank you all for being here. A couple of housekeeping items. We need to wrap up the program by 7 p.m. because we need to be out of here by 8 p.m. so staff can get on with their evening. And then we are going to do some Q&A. So for those of you who are here in person, we've got folks online. So we're going to ask if you've got a question. We have some staff members with some Q&A cards standing over there. And if you've got a question, you can fill that out and you can hand those back in when we finish up the presentation, and then we'll take those questions. We'll vet the questions and I'll ask the questions. We also have folks online, and so if you are online, you can type a question in the Q&A and we will make sure those questions get to us. If we don't get to all the questions, if you leave your contact information on the card, we will make sure to follow up with you and email the answer to your question. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda for the evening. And we've got a robust conversation tonight. We're going to talk about agriculture as an amenity. We're going to talk about the Placer County Conservation Plan. We're going to hear from a couple of our local farmers. We're going to get a perspective about innovation and interaction, as well as some life stories about being a rancher. And then we'll have time for Q&A. So I'm excited you're here, and I'm going to start with some introductions of our panelists. We'll start with the introductions, and then we'll have each of the panelists come up and share. So I'd like to first introduce Supervisor, I forgot one thing. Before I do that, there were a couple of introductions I wanted to make. So before I introduce our panel, I do have with us some elected officials joining us. We have one of my colleagues from the Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Jim Holmes. We have the Vice Mayor of the City of Roseville, Bruce Hodeschelt. He's in the back. Pauline Rakucci is one of our City Council members. Pauline is back over here. Scott Albert, Roseville City Council member, representing the West Roseville area. We have Bill Schultz with the Dry Creek School Board. Thank you, Bill, for being here. And Christina Faria with Assemblyman Kevin Kiley's office has joined us as well. All right, now it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our panel. I will start with Robert Wygant. Robert Wygant is a Placer County supervisor representing District 2, and he represents the western portion of the county, including Lincoln, Sheridan, and the western portions of Rockland and Roseville. Robert lives on the same Foothills Ranch in rural Lincoln, where he grew up. He has lived in Placer County for over 50 years, and he's wrapping up his 28th year on the Placer County Board of Supervisors. Robert graduated from Lincoln High School. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree in finance and management from USC. He was vice president, chief financial officer, and part owner of Waco Aerospace Systems, an aircraft repair facility based in Lincoln. He has been avidly involved in Placer Legacy, and that's a program to protect land, water, and open space here in Placer County. He is an avid outdoorsman, and he admits to being a fanatic fly fisherman, and I can almost guarantee you that he will get a chance to do a whole lot more fly fishing when he retires at the end of the year. So Robert, we're so glad you're here with us. Next joining us is Josh Huntsinger. Josh grew up in Grass Valley and has always had a love for agriculture. And this is likely because he had grandparents and other family members who were farmers. Throughout high school and into college, Josh worked for some interesting organizations. He worked on an organic peach and apple farm, a Christmas tree farm, and a commercial beekeeping operation. He graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo with a Bachelor of Science degree in fruit science. He began his career with the Placer County Agriculture Department right after college, and then over the next several years, he gained experience in all of the many programs that the Ag Commissioner is responsible for. In 2011, he was appointed to the Placer County Agricultural Commissioner, Sealer of Weights and Measures, and part of his job, he works with many of the county's other departments on policy issues primarily focused around agricultural land use, economic development, forest health, and catastrophic wildfire reduction. Next joining us is Roop Purwal, and he is with Go Pure Farms. Roop started off as an attorney in San Francisco. However, his entrepreneurial spirit motivated him to pursue other endeavors. He first started investing in commercial real estate, mainly value-add apartment communities, and then got involved in land entitlement and development, which is really a long process. So in the interim, he develops and farms almond and pistachio orchards, and he currently has almond orchards in West Roseville. And I will let him tell you whether or not we should call it an almond orchard or an almond orchard. That is always up for debate. And last but not least, we have Joe Fisher, and Joe is a manager of Bruin Ranch, and he's also the regional director for the California Farm Bureau. Joe was born and raised in the Sierra Nevada foothills in Calaveras County, and most of his cattle experience came from being involved in his family's endeavors as well, as they had commercial cow and calf operations. He too attended Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, so I see a couple of young people, and if you are future farmers, I think Cal Poly might be a good place to go to school. And there he discovered his true passion for the registered cattle business. He received a bachelor's degree in animal science with an emphasis on livestock production. And upon graduation, Bruin Ranch was seeking an additional employee with experience for their expanding embryo transfer program, and then somebody who had a firm grasp on a day-to-day operations of a working cattle ranch. As the ranch grew, his responsibilities grew as well, and he also now works with bull buyers and does marketing for the ranch. So thank you all for being here, and now I will kick off the next part of the presentation, and we're going to talk about the amenities of agriculture here in Placer County. So as we look around the area here in South Placer, we see a lot of homes, we see a lot of businesses. And I think a lot of us aren't actually aware that we have a lot of ag in this area. If you go to the next slide, we have more than 23 crops that are grown here in Placer County. You can see the diversity. And the top 5 crops are rice, walnuts, cattle, almonds, and nursery stock. On the next slide, we'll see that those 23 plus products are grown on more than 180 farms. And they're all these farms are different sizes. They can be anywhere from a couple of acres to hundreds of acres. And we even have a few ranches that are up to more than 1,000 acres. Some other really cool things about Placer County is that we have 9 different certified farmers markets. In Roseville, every Tuesday morning, you can go to the certified farmers market over near the fountains. And so tomorrow you could pick up some fresh fruits and vegetables over there. And there's also a farmer's market in Rockland over at the Blue Oaks Center where R.C. Willie is. And that farmer's market is usually June through October on Saturday mornings. The other really cool thing is that there are 23 wineries in Placer County, 15 breweries, and 1 craft distillery. And I don't know if there's one more than 23 wineries because I was talking to the vintners and they said a new one just opened up last week. So we are rich in agricultural opportunities. We also have some wonderful events that we can celebrate agriculture here in our Foothill region. We have every November the Mountain Mandarin Festival. It is going to take place this November on November 18th through the 20th, and that will be at the Gold Country Fairgrounds. It's a wonderful event, and you can also go purchase your mandarins from the local mandarin farmers, ranchers, orchard growers in Penryn and in the Newcastle area. Machado Farms just this last weekend had an apple festival. They also have a peach festival in the spring. And I will tell you, how many of us go to Apple Hill, right? You go to Apple Hill and check out the apples and get really good apple pie. I can tell you that Machado Farms apple pie can rival the apple pies in Apple Hill. So if you don't want to drive all the way to Apple Hill, you can just drive up Auburn to get some great apples here in Placer County. And then every year, which is so much fun, is the annual Placer Grown Farm and Barn Tour. And that's an opportunity where it was just this last weekend, it's an opportunity where folks can go see working farms, right? Pet the animals, see where the crops are grown, find out where your locally sourced foods come from. And you will often see the Placer Grown sign there. That is our way of really letting folks know which products are grown here in Placer County. And we want to encourage you to buy Placer Grown and support our local agriculture. Okay, so how many of us knew that we have a Placer County wine and ale trail? I mentioned we've got tons of wineries and breweries. It's a thriving community. And I will tell you, I was just talking with a gentleman earlier. He's like, we don't have to go to Napa. We can just go up the road to Wisevilla Winery in Lincoln and many other wineries and get some great wines and enjoy a beautiful drive. And these wines, a lot of these wines are sold at local grocery stores. A lot of our local breweries like Knee Deep in Auburn are being distributed throughout California. And then there are a couple of really cool, unique events or places you can go to visit. You can go visit the Goat House Brewing Company. It's located on a working goat farm. So if you want to go drink beer and see goats, it's a great place to go. And then Catherine's Beer Garden in Rockland, they brew authentic German beers in-house. So we've got just a wide variety of opportunities. And I want to encourage you to take advantage of the agricultural resources we have here in this county. You're able to support our local ag economy. That's really important. It allows them to grow their businesses. But you also get to enjoy wonderful scenic drives, see some beautiful scenery. But as you drive those beautiful areas, and he's going to hit the next slide for me, I want to encourage you to remember that those are ag areas. A lot of times you've got folks who are crossing the street in a tractor. or they might be driving livestock down the road. So slow down, enjoy the drive, and appreciate all that Placer County has to offer when it comes to agricultural products. Mr. Wygant, you are now up. So come on up and join us, Robert. And Robert is going to talk about the Placer County Conservation Plan and future growth. And you can use that microphone right there, Robert. Does that work?
Yep. So, pleasure to be here. Thanks you all for coming. My job is to talk about the Placer County Conservation Program or the Conservation Plan, depending on what era you started studying that. It's a program that's been 20 years in the making, and it's important to understand that really the precursor for it is a program called Placer Legacy, because you might hear about it as well. And back when I came to the board in 1995, the central controversy that was constant at the county in politics was growth. No growth, a lot of growth, growth management. And in 1997, after a particular election, we had a makeup of a board such that there was a strong willingness to really sit down and bite the bullet and sink our teeth into that controversy. And from that came the effort called Placer Legacy, which was considering land development patterns and processes that would preserve permanently open space, with the key being really that we wanted to avoid growth patterns that look like Sacramento County, not to mention the Bay Area or Southern California. My family moved up here in 1961 from Southern California, so that was in my conscience in a strong way. But the board overall thought that we could do a better job with long-range planning that recognized the value of open space, including our agricultural community, and do more. And so in about a 2-year process, we adopted Placer Legacy, which put us into the business of protecting permanently open space. And have any of you been to Hidden Falls Park? Great, that's excellent. So that's our flagship open space acquisition, and we've done a variety of different things, like by conservation easements on farms, thereby precluding that farm from ever developing. But Hidden Falls is about a 1,000 acre park, much like a national park. But again, it was in an area that we thought should stay open space forever and have that be an amenity to the people who lived here. So obviously you can go out there and hike and horseback ride, et cetera. But that was the vision, to try to create that kind of effort. As a part of Placer Legacy, the board considered trying to accomplish what's called a habitat conservation plan with the federal government, or a natural communities conservation plan with the state government. And essentially what it is a shifting of their authority down to the local level, whereby if a big project development goes forward, they typically have to get environmental permits for the disturbance that they're going to cause for property that is somehow protected. It either has endangered species on it, or it has federally or state protected waters on it. And so to do that, they have to get a myriad of permits from the Army Corps of Engineers, Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, State Fish and Wildlife, and the list of regional water quality control goes on and on and on, and it's very complex. And in our county, with some of our larger projects, developers have complained to me, telling me that some of these permits literally take 8 years to get after they've gone through the entitlement process here locally. So the idea was a pathway just to have that authority vested locally so that we could issue those permits when we approved projects in a way that we thought was appropriate. It only took 20 years, so you're getting a very abbreviated version of all of that tonight, but I'd be happy to answer any questions anytime actually before I retire. But essentially what now exists here in Placer County is that in a partnership with the county and the city of Lincoln for development that's covered in those two jurisdictions, we issue the permits for that conservation. And it includes the fact that the conservation, the open space preservation for those projects has to occur in Placer County. And I was supposed to turn this. I figured that out. Oh. So if you look at this map, it's basically southwestern Placer County, and the green areas are areas that, in accordance with the plan, which is a 50-year program, will not be developed. They will not be allowed to be rezoned for development. And within that dark green area, it is about 200,000 acres. There'll be about 50,000 acres in it that are set aside as permanent conservation easements forever. All of those areas that are preserved for habitat purposes will have to be farmed in some fashion or another. So the biggest habitat type that is most controversial in our county are vernal pools, if you know vernal pools. They must be grazed in accordance with the regulation in a cow and calf operation. So even if there are big habitats set aside, you'll see cows and calves on that property by requirement. So all that's by way of this vision, I think, will essentially be a build-out vision of the county. Our population will probably double, but that will take about a 50-year time frame. And then I think the county will see development go to other places because it'll be politically popular to keep the county more what it looks like then. But it also will be very, very hard to get a permit to do more development after those preserves are put in place. So with all of that, it's important to know that if you live out here to the west, you will always have neighbors who are in agriculture. And they'll be doing things like separating baby calves from mother cows. And when they do that for about 3 or 5 nights, they'll be bawling every night, all night long. Some of you may have heard that. You'll hear crop dusters, you'll probably hear irrigation pumps, you'll hear tractors. But to me, it's a reflection of the richness of our life here in Placer County. And even though it might be inconvenient, in some ways I think it's actually interesting and a critical, important fabric of our community. So with that, I'll just, if I do it the right direction. I just have some slides that you can see that the property in front between the orchard and the urbanization is mostly vernal pool property. So you have the orchards behind you that will have heavy industrial type of agricultural activities on them. The vernal pool property, if it's protected in a conservation easement, will have to be grazed. And then adjacent to that, of course, are houses. I'm not very good at this part. And really just some photographs of that fabric that I'm pleased to say will be well planned, well thought out. The open space areas will be meaningful enough, separated enough so that it can be farmed forever. And so to me, that's a great legacy to know for those of us who live here now. So that's the end of my presentation. Thanks. You're gonna.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you so much for your leadership on the Placer County Conservation Plan. It's great to be able to see that we're going to preserve lands that will not be developed in perpetuity. So that's terrific. Now, Josh, you are up next. And Josh Huntsinger is going to talk about Western Placer agriculture.
The good thing about this job is it keeps you humble. So we'll start with that. So no, thank you so much for being here tonight. I want to special thanks to Supervisor Wygant and Supervisor Gore for their leadership in bringing about this event. This topic of what I call agriculture and urban interface is one of the big topics of our day. As I'm sure you're very aware, acutely aware here in West Roseville, Placer County has been a very fast-growing place. Let me get to the right slide. There we go. Placer County has been a really rapidly growing place for the duration of my career. I started with the county in the year 2000, and since that time, as you're all aware, kind of from that 2000-2001 time period up to the present with a few starts and stops, Placer County has just been a tremendously fast-growing area of housing developments and associated commercial uses. But during that same time, agriculture has actually grown in the county too. So it's pretty cool. There are times when agriculture and residential development get pretty close to each other, and that can be a really challenging situation. So that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tonight. Just really quickly, I want to start out though with, I graduated from Cal Poly with an ag degree, and when I graduated, I had no idea what an ag commissioner was, what a county ag commissioner is. So let me just take 2 seconds to say, each county in the state of California is required by law to have an agricultural commissioner. It's an appointed position, and we have kind of 3 main regulatory responsibilities. One is to prevent invasive species from being introduced into the county, so that would be, and then therefore the state, that would be things like invasive insects, weeds, plant diseases, things like that. We're tasked with keeping those out, because when we keep those pests out, that means farmers don't have to contend with them. Your urban landscapes, you don't have to contend with those things in your yards. People use less pesticides because we don't have those pests, and it also actually facilitates international trade. Like, we can't export crops if we have the med fly in our crops, for instance. We can't, our farmers can't ship them out of the country, for instance. So that's kind of pest prevention is the first thing. The second thing is pesticide regulation. I am mandated by law to enforce California's pesticide laws and regulations here in Placer County. And so we're going to talk a little more, do a little deeper dive into that in a second. The third task is that I'm also the sealer of weights and measures for the county. And so that means my name's on every gas pump in the county. So we actually test all commercial weighing and measuring devices, and actually check stores to make sure they're charging the posted price, make sure a loaf of bread, if it says 12 ounces, actually weighs 12 ounces and you're getting what you pay for, basically. Above and beyond that, though, my Board of Supervisors has tasked me as kind of the head agricultural official for being that kind of advocate for both the public and for our farmers and ranchers to help everybody work together, and that's where kind of that land use policy role that I have fits in. So with that, let me just dive into this a little bit. So we're going to talk specifically about Western Placer Ag. Hopefully you were able to see the map up front. This is the same map as I have up top there. I know I spoke with a few of you about this. It's a little hard to see, but basically what this map shows is that there's a lot of agriculture in Western Placer County, and we also have quite a bit of residential growth kind of heading out towards the west, towards that agriculture. And some of that growth is getting pretty close to our agriculture at this point. And so we've had some little points of conflict, and I'll talk about those here coming up. Okay, so just to give you a synopsis, and Supervisor Gore already covered this, but our number one crop in the county, and it has been throughout my tenure as an ag commissioner, is rice. We typically have between 9,000 and 15,000 acres of rice every year in the county. Almonds are a new crop. Probably 6 or 7 years ago, we had precisely 0 acres of commercial almonds in Placer County, and now it's in our top 5 crops. So, Placer County is blessed with an abundant water supply, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of growth as other areas of the state are really suffering in drought. New farmers are looking at Placer County and saying, hey, this might be a good place to, start a business or expand a business. Walnuts along the same lines. We used to have about, historically about 900 acres of walnuts, Now we have over 4,500 acres of walnuts in the county. And then cattle's been a perennial, and that's kind of more of a county-wide agricultural production. And so those are some of the top ones. Nursery stock's another. So for 2021, which is our most recent crop report, it was the first one to cross $100 million. What's important about that is only the gross value of the agricultural crops. That does not include, that's not profit, that's not the total economic activity, that's just what we call the farm gate value. So that's the value of the raw agricultural commodity as it leaves the farm. So that was a pretty exciting number to reach, and I think it's going to keep going up over the next few years. So agriculture is growing in dollar value, at least in the county, which is pretty exciting. So the challenge, as I mentioned, is that agriculture and urban interface. These are 2 pictures side by side. Those aren't actually next to each other. So, but we have West Roseville here on this side, and that's an almond orchard. That's kind of what we're talking about tonight. What are those impacts? And so agriculture is not always a great neighbor to have next to residential uses. And so noise is a big one. We get complaints about, the tractor is running, and that tractor happens to be running at 2 in the morning, and I'm trying to sleep. Or the most recent one, some of you may be aware of, was the Zon guns, those explosions which make a bunch of noise to scare off wildlife. Got lots of complaints from this neck of the woods about that over the last couple of years. Dust. A lot of ag operations make dust. And where like a construction site is very heavily regulated, so the tractors on a construction site are not allowed to make what's called fugitive dust, which is dust that's leaving the site. Ag has quite a few exemptions just because it's done on a scale in such a way that'd be pretty darn hard to regulate. And so dust can sometimes be an issue. I've had complaints where, oh my gosh, I moved next to this farm and I thought it was all great when it was like a green field of grass, and now the farmer's disking it and all my patio furniture is just covered in dust. And it's, we get those kinds of calls. Odor's another big one, whether it's livestock or some of the fertilizer things. I know there's a farmer that operates some of the ground up adjacent to the material recovery, the dump, the material recovery facility, those big crop circles. And when they apply a fertilizer, I've gotten plenty of calls about the dust when they apply manure, because it's an organic field, so they actually apply manure to that field. Nighttime operations, as I mentioned, farming's kind of a 24-hour-a-day job at certain points in the year. You got to get that crop in the ground or got to get it harvested. So sometimes the farmers are working 20 hours a day, literally, to get that crop planted or harvested. And then pesticide use, we're going to specifically talk about that a little bit, and a lot of concerns around that. So a couple of things I want to show you here right off the bat. So the funky looking yellow device with the propane cylinder there, that is called a Zon gun. And so that is the culprit in those mysterious explosions that we've been talking about over the last couple of years here in West Roseville. And so it doesn't fire anything, but it makes it doesn't fire a projectile. It does look like a cannon. It's called a Zon gun, Z-O-N. And it is specifically sold to farmers to scare off wildlife. So when a farmer's suffering, in some cases here in Placer County, tens of thousands of dollars of damage per night from like a big flock of geese or even deer we've had causing problems, the farmer sometimes resorts to those as a non-lethal way of controlling wildlife, keeping it off the crop until the crop's big enough that it can resist that wildlife damage. The other slide is actually a sweeper, which is picking up almond nuts out off the ground. So they shake the trees. We'll go through some more pictures of that process, but they shake the trees, nuts fall on the ground, and then they have a giant sweeper that sweeps those nuts up and picks them up so that they can be brought to a processor. However, it makes a ton of dust because you want real dry conditions when you're doing that. So those are just a couple examples of some of the impacts. So odor's another one. Sorry, Joe Fisher, who's going to speak in a minute, is probably mad at me for showing smelly cows there. But sometimes livestock makes odors, fertilizer, manure applications make odors as well. Let's see. And then let's pause real quick on pesticide use. So this is actually Kelsey Lewis, who's one of my agricultural inspectors, conducting what we call a pesticide use monitoring inspection on something called an air blast sprayer. So an air blast sprayer, it's got a big fan on the back, and then there's a bunch of nozzles, and that's used to spray, it'd be like an insecticide or a fungicide on an orchard. So what she's doing there is an unannounced inspection where she drives around out here in the county looking for pesticide applications. When she finds them, she actually stops the application and says, hey, I'm gonna walk you through a whole bunch of requirements to make sure your employees are safe, you're protecting the environment, you're following the pesticide label, all of those good things. And that's just one tiny facet of a massive program that starts with federal EPA and then goes down to California EPA and the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, who oversees my program, which I then implement at the county level. So we permit every grower who applies a pesticide actually has a permit with my office. They have to follow the pesticide label, which is vetted for all aspects from environmental harm, worker safety, et cetera, with both federal and state EPA. They're required to do employee training if they have employees handling pesticides. We conduct unannounced inspections out in the field. We do records inspections to make sure they're training records and they're keeping records of use and stuff. And all of that. So it's a very robust program. I'm just scratching the surface of it. And I'm anticipating we'll probably have a few more conversations about pesticide use during our Q&A. So, next, let's see. This is not working. Okay. So here's where I really want to park and spend a few minutes. And this is the county's right to farm ordinance. And so we actually have an ordinance in the county. And the philosophy behind that ordinance, the way I explain it is, basically, you don't get to move next to an airport and complain about planes flying over your house. That's the philosophy. Does everybody kind of get that concept, right? It's like, oh man, I moved next to this airport. I can't believe there's planes flying over my house. Same thing with farming. You move next to a farm, you have a reasonable expectation that farmers are going to farm next to you if you move next to a farm. And so the county has this ordinance which basically is intended to protect, and it's mirrored off a state law to the same effect. And that's intended to protect farming operations when new residential development or new housing moves in next door. I want to stop there though and say, I am the county agricultural commissioner. My position does not recognize city boundaries. So if you are a resident in Placer County, if you live in Placer County, I am your agricultural commissioner. As a taxpayer, I represent you just like a farmer. And so I work for you just as much as I work for the farmers. So kind of, my very maybe flippant sounding thing though is I say this is the right to farm, not to be the right to be a jerk ordinance. And so that is the way I implement this, right? And so we try to seek reasonable solutions that allow crops to be grown in Placer County while also doing what we can to mitigate, to arbitrate, to help everybody be good neighbors to each other. So if there's something, oh my gosh, this farmer's doing this thing and he's doing it every day right when my kids are taking a nap and making a lot of noise. I'm gonna call the farmer, I'm gonna say, hey, the neighbor's kids take a nap every day at 2 p.m. Can you do that activity at a different time of day? Sometimes the farmer will say, I have to do it at 2 because of this specific factor. But more times it's, no, I can move it to 1 p.m. or 3 p.m. and it's no big deal. So I'm so sorry, I didn't realize I was causing that impact to my neighbor. And that's a really oversimplified example, but that's kind of how we work through those situations in most cases. In some cases, we can't mitigate it, but in most we can. And so that's really what we try to do. The farming has to be also a standard farming practice. The farmer can't just do something like way out in left field that's just, doing what they're doing for no good reason, that's way outside of what you would expect from a normal farming operation. There's some specific caveats, but in general, farming is protected from nuisance complaints. And so I'm the one, those complaints come to me, and then I try to work, in the case with the recent Zongun stuff, we worked with the farmers. I knew exactly who was doing it, I figured it out really quickly, and then we worked with them to say, hey, do you need to do it at night, or could you just do it during the day? Could you point them a different direction? Could you put some hay bales around them so the sound's not directed towards that neighborhood? We worked through a lot of those things. Are there other ways you can scare off the wildlife besides these noisemakers? That's the kind of stuff we do. So that's in a nutshell what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. Is just it's really challenging when you live near agriculture, but at the same time that ability to get 5 minutes outside of your door, you can be in a really rural, beautiful area is pretty cool. I want to go through just a few slides on some crop production. I'm just going to blow through these because I'm running long. Just want to show you, if you're driving through and you don't know what it looks like, this is rice harvest. Those are combines, those are rice harvesters. That's what rice looks like up close. More rice harvest, they fill those big trailers with rice when they haul it out of the field. So if you see some of those, they might be full of rice this time of year. Walnut harvest, they're shaking the tree on that side to get the nuts to fall out of it, and then they're sweeping them up off the ground in that other slide. Gosh, this controller's not, oops. And so just more walnut harvest. Almond bloom, so that's a beautiful thing, but it also includes a lot of honeybees. Almonds must have honeybees in order to produce a crop. So there's a whole lot of honeybees next door to you during that kind of February through March time frame. Again, almond sweeping can make a lot of dust. Oops. And yeah, there's my department's contact information, and I sure thank you for your time. I'll look for some good question and answer time with you.
Thank you, Josh. Really appreciate it. And next up is Roop Purwal, and he's going to give us a perspective from a farmer on innovation and interaction. So come on up, Roop.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here. My name is Roop Purwal. I'm an almond and pistachio grower here in Placer County, as well as Yolo County and Sutter County and Yuba County. So what I wanted to talk about is just taking it a really far step back. Farming. It's a really important component of our modern society. So let's fly back into time 13,000 years ago. how did we get our food? We need food to survive. It's a basic human necessity. We were hunters and gatherers. So like that, our societies were, we traveled in small packs, we hunted, we foraged, we followed the food, and we spent the majority of our time and energy doing that. So we didn't have much time to do any other things like complain about dust that the farmer across the street is throwing up. About 12,000 years ago, the Neolithic Revolution happened, and that was farmers or folks understood that, hey, I can grow food and create a reliable supply of food throughout the year, and that really takes the edge off of, am I gonna eat tonight? Am I gonna go hunt a deer and the like? So what that led to was settlements, a sense of community. They expanded, they grew their food. So farming was a very important part of society way back when, and even 40 years ago or 50 years ago, everyone kind of knew what farming was around it. And over the past 30, 40, 50 years, we've gotten really efficient in the way we grow food, and farming operations have gotten bigger. And our human capital here in the United States is education. And so there's been this disconnect, which I'll talk about here. So modern society, we have a disconnect. And this is exemplified when I go to Whole Foods sometimes in the Bay Area, where I see a guy eating his salad, and I just think to myself of him thinking, dude, where's my salad coming from? All the while complaining about the cost of food at Whole Foods. There was a study done this month, and it said nearly 40% of US adults have never met a farmer. So if you've never met a farmer, you probably don't know how food is grown. And I always like this quote by Christopher Dodd: "It's easy for Americans to forget that food they eat doesn't magically appear on the supermarket shelf." So there is a disconnect here in our society, and it's mainly the coastal environments where there is no ag. They have the urban jungle, and that's where Supervisor Wygant has really incorporated farming and growth very well in terms of harmony to keep the fabric of Placer County. So I want to commend him and the supervisors for doing that. So ag will always be a part of Placer County based on the PCCP. So now, food is a basic human necessity. We're good at growing it. So our food supply is what we need, and there's a lot of folks that watch it on the stock market and the like. So I superimposed a philosopher by the name of Thomas Malthus on Thanos' body. So there's been this analysis and foresight for 200-300 years where the concept is the same. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie Avengers Infinity Wars, but the concept is the same, and it's depicted in this graph. Population's growing, resources are growing, but is population growing faster than resources? So in the movie, Thanos' solution is, let's kill off a third of the population so we don't get to this crisis in the galaxy, right? So Thomas Malthus back in 1798 basically had the same thesis, that population is growing faster than food supply, so we're gonna have a crisis, and population's gonna have to stop growing, or we're gonna have some other problems. Just like in the movie where the Avengers saved the day, they were the superheroes, right? And it was all good. You guys are lucky. You guys have superheroes too. They're farmers. Yeah. So what we've been able to do is prove for the past 200 to 300 years, all of the mathematicians and the statisticians that are saying, hey, we can't keep pace with population growth. We've defied the odds, generally speaking. So, and how have we done that is through technology. So that's we're more efficient with the same acreage now than 50 years ago, and the goal is to keep that. And where is this happening? I mean, in California, we are leading the nation. UC Davis is world-class. It's in our backyard, and I consult with those folks all the time. And that's kind of my forte of what I like to do. I grew up on an almond orchard in the Central Valley in a small town in Ceres, and my dad and I often butt heads. Old school farmers have a certain way of doing things, and that's the way they've done them, and that's the way they're gonna do them. And I always try to incorporate technological advances to everything that I do. So I always often ask my dad, why? Why are we doing this? So an example of that is 30 years ago, we used to flood irrigate almond orchards. Now we do dual line drip and we micro irrigate. So we save water and it's more efficiently used, and fertilizer is more efficiently applied. So technology is going to continue to grow, and I think we're going to stay ahead of the curve. And the main reason for that is the stuff that our research and universities do in California. And I've been in classes at UC Davis, and they do this fruit and nut symposium every year. And I went about 5 years ago. And to my left, I had hedge fund advisors from London. I had farmers from India. I had farmers from South America, all over the world. And they were all coming to UC Davis to learn how to grow, respectively, their trees and fruit and nut crops in their respective regions. So that's our superpower here, is we are ahead of the curve and we teach the world on the most efficient ways to grow food. So the other side of this is the economic impact. So the US, we're an import nation for our consumer goods. Other countries are more efficient, and we can get into those specifics because there's currency manipulation and stuff like that happening, but they produce goods, we buy their goods, and we go into debt to do that, right? So one outlier there and one silver lining is we are a net ag exporter. So even in California, where we're, minimum wage is where it's at, and the regulations and the laws that we have to compete with other countries like China and South American countries, we are still more efficient and better at producing our crops, certain crops, than those countries. So we are a net ag exporter. So that's something that we can do more efficiently and better than other parts of the world due to our global economy. And so we're exporting that. So that's a silver lining for our economics locally. So if we're producing ag goods, then it's leading to jobs here locally and to send those commodities overseas. So that's a silver lining, and that's something I think we should be proud of in terms of what we can do, even in a heavily regulated state like California. So the numbers, right? So this is California in general. 1/3 of the U.S. vegetables are grown in California, and 3/4 of the U.S. fruit and nuts are grown in California. So California is a big player. Hollywood and Silicon Valley gets all the glory, but the Central Valley, we do a lot, and in terms of ag for the U.S., we do a lot. So those are some staggering numbers I wanted to share. So the main components, so I wanted to give that background. Ag is a fundamental basis for our modern society. We need food to survive. No farmers, no food. And so now we get to this issue of ag and urban interface. So I wanted to put it all into perspective because I grew up on an almond orchard. So I dealt with some of these things growing up where the shaker's coming and my whole house is shaking, right? And I'm trying to play my Super Nintendo and I'm telling my dad, hey, keep it down. And he's not listening to me. So the thing that we do, and Josh Hunsinger talked about it a lot, is we strike a balance. And I'm not just saying this because I'm in Placer County. I farm in other counties, and hopefully those folks aren't here. But Placer County has really taken this by the horn. I mean, Josh and his staff, the supervisors, everyone here, they take their job seriously. They communicate clearly. We strike a balance. It's like, hey, just like the examples Josh shared, I need to do this, but hey, let's be proactive. Let's have more events like this where we bring the issues up, talk about them. Everyone's reasonable, and there's always a reasonable solution, which we've done that on a few occasions with Josh and his staff, and it's worked out beautifully. So I'm really happy that Supervisor Gore put this together to kind of throw it out there. And farmers, obviously we have a few bad apples like any other industry, but for the most part, we're nice folks. We like to help, and we like to kind of be stewards of the land. So, and that's why I was so happy to come out here and talk. And I had a little point on the PCCP, but that's totally moot because you heard it directly from Supervisor Wygant. So that's a really cool, the Placer County Conservation Plan is really cool in how they've, forward thinking and how they planned about development and also keeping the conservation area. So that's something that's really unique in California, and it's cool that it happened in Placer County. And then finally, I just wanted to put a picture of my family. The ag makes a good backdrop for pictures too, so that's what I'll do.
Thank you, Roop. And we have to warn you, though, although the almond orchard blossoms look great, you probably don't want to show up in somebody's orchard without permission, right? Because a lot of folks love to take those photos, and it can be a challenge. So next we have Joe Fisher, and Joe's going to give us a couple of stories of being a rancher.
Maybe
Or
a little
whatever
less
else
than a
you wanna
couple.
share.
Maybe a little less than a couple. And I have some good news and bad news. The bad news first is that Josh took most of my time. The good news is that for your last speaker, who is the most underdressed, the most underprepared, and the most unarticulate, we'll round out the evening. So we'll get to the question and answer portion, which I know you all are most excited about, especially those of you online, and the parts that really we can relate to the most as well.
Well, you take it away, and I think it's appropriate that a farmer is wearing jeans and cowboy boots, so I think you're dressed completely fine.
The hat's in my pickup. I could go get it if you want. But thank you all for coming tonight. And again, it's really nice to see. I wanted to commend Supervisor Gore, Supervisor Wygant. Also, another icebreaker, kind of lighthearted moment. Thank you to Landon Wolf for finding that picture of me a few LBs ago and writing such nice things about me in my biographical information. You know, the one thing I just want to step back and say from the farmer's perspective is we're no different than all of you. We're exactly the same. And Root put up the picture of his family here. I have 4 kids at home and a wife, and I'm here tonight just trying to make sure that we provide that interface between ag and the urban communities of Placer County to make sure that my kids have a future in Placer County. I want to go to bed at 10:30 just like the rest of you. Unfortunately, my vocation doesn't allow it. But it's the one we've chosen, it's a life that we love, and it's a way that we love to raise our kids here in Placer County. So a few things of note. I don't know if all of you knew this or not, but interesting trivia. There's only one other climate in the world that mimics California. It's a unique Mediterranean climate, and it makes for a fantastic farming opportunity, which also is a fantastic place to live. And I think since the beginning of time in California, we've realized that and realized the expansion that is always taking at breakneck speed. I think this delicate balance between the ecological benefits of agriculture, the rural lifestyle communities, and then supporting our actual residents of California is something that most farmers and ranchers that are still here ranching today have done a great job of navigating. And those of us who aim to be ranching here in the future are open to embrace new collective ideas with the communities that we're involved in. So I think that this is one of the reasons they put me maybe here, is that these guys had wonderful, can you guys hear me better now? I'm sorry. I don't have a slideshow presentation. I just wanted to distill out the stuff so that we didn't touch on multiple topics the exact same way. But the one thing I did want to touch on are the exciting benefits of agriculture that you all can realize, other than the green strip, green belt type, just open space that we all enjoy. The farmers market and the agritourism industry is right on the cusp of becoming a booming industry in Placer County. I think it's exciting that you all can raise your children and grandchildren in an area that embraces agriculture and celebrates its rich heritage in Placer County. I also think it's important to educate the people who are going to be consuming these products. We just saw 3 years ago, the value of national security as it relates to growing your own food, fiber, clothing, fuel, all of those things. California can be resilient in the nation and the world if we just connect these 2 dots. So thank you all for being here. I don't have a lot more. Let's get to the question and answers because that's where I fit in best. Unless you want more from me, I can keep going.
That sounds great, unless you have, well, while we do this, and I might have you think of a fun story to share. If anybody has any questions, now is the opportunity to hand them to our team and pass them forward so we can take those questions. If any of you are online and you have some questions, make sure you type those into the Q&A and we will get those questions. So as we do that, I want you to share a story or two.
I do have
Joe.
a challenge or two. So maybe on the ag-urban interface, I might have a little bit more experience than a lot of folks because I ranch on 12,000 acres, both between Nevada, Placer, Sierra, Yuba, or both 4, right, counties. We're kind of spread out, but the majority of the operation is centered in Placer and Nevada counties. And the headquarters in proper is a horseshoe-shaped parcel that goes around a golf course. And so much of my time is spent on these interface issues of folks that might see a baby calf out by itself and really concerned about its well-being. If you see a baby calf or a baby lamb and it's laying by itself, its mother knows right where it is and be rest assured that it'll come back to it in short order. The other one is, it is our private property and it is our industry, it is our job, it is our business. And so sometimes we try to be surely friendly with folks that are visiting us. But at the same time, if you wouldn't appreciate people in your front door or opening up your refrigerator, maybe consider that too as you're out perusing other private property parcels, including walnut orchards or almond orchards. Again, there are the proper times for those interfaces, and it's not a 24-hour type of exchange. That's the best I've got for you.
I appreciate that. And I remember, I think Roop mentioning to me that there's ag operations going on. The last thing we want is for people to get hit by heavy equipment.
Absolutely.
There's pesticides being sprayed. It's really about making sure people are safe, because those can be dangerous operations. So be aware that it's an operation, and we want to respect that to keep people safe.
Yeah, and you can post on Instagram, take pictures of us, do that stuff. Maybe just not my kids' faces on Facebook.
Well,
I would
and you know,
appreciate
as much as we can, we do want to promote agriculture here in Placer County, because like we've seen, $100 million benefit to our local economy. So as we're collecting a couple of questions, I'm going to ask my panelists to come on up. I have one question here as we gather a couple of others. And the first one is, which I think is a great question: should we be concerned about pesticides seeping into Roseville's groundwater storage? So Josh, I'm gonna let you answer that question.
Yeah, no, great question. And I'll try to keep it short. But in short, as I mentioned, pesticides, that's a very broad term for all insecticides, herbicides, rodenticides, fungicides. And one of the things that those materials are evaluated for is their propensity to contaminate groundwater. And when one is found that has that ability to contaminate groundwater, additional regulations are put into place, and then my office regulates those. So farmers are not allowed to mix their pesticides within a certain distance of a well. If it's certain materials, they have to get a special permit for and file plans before they can use it, and then they have to work with my staff to make sure that plan is followed. So in short, it is very heavily regulated by both the state and the county, and we do a lot to ensure that groundwater is protected from pesticide contamination.
And so I'm going to thank you, Josh. I'm going to follow up just on the question about pesticides. It's a two-question question. Do you spray any neonics?
Neonicotinoids. Yeah.
And then the follow-up is, how do you ensure the pesticide mist doesn't drift over to where kids are playing?
Yeah. So these neonics, as we call them, are a class of insecticides which are actually, from an efficacy standpoint, absolutely revolutionary. They're amazing in that they, in very low doses, actually control insects that feed on the sap of plants. Very efficiently, they actually go into the plant. They're what's called systemic, so they stay inside the plant, and the plant becomes toxic to insects that feed on them. From a human safety standpoint, they're amazing and very safe, but what we found is that systemic nature also can get into the nectar of, and I think this is where the question was going, can get into the nectar and then contaminate honeybees. And so there's a lot of concern about that. And so the state's actually working. Yes, farmers in Placer County do use neonics. They're legal to use in California today. The state is developing a very robust set of regulations to reduce and specify the uses of those neonics. So I think there'll be a lot less used in the very near future. But today, they are illegal, as we say, part of the farmer's toolbox.
Great, thank you. Another question which has to do with drought and water, and the question is, with high water usage rice and almond crops, how will that affect our water future? Now, one thing I can share is that we do receive our water from Placer County Water Agency, and we're very fortunate that we have a source of water that we can control, which allows us, before it gets to a place where the feds take the water away, we can use that water for our rice farms, our almond orchards. And we were just talking earlier that ranchers and farmers are coming here because there is more water availability. Now, if you want to add anything else to that comment, feel free.
Yeah, so we have two different water sources, or two different types of water in Placer County. One is surface water, and that's what Supervisor Gore alluded to with Placer County Water Agency. To the north of us, Nevada Irrigation District supplies a lot of that surface water. And that's water that comes from the Sierra Nevadas into reservoirs and then down through ditches and pipes throughout Placer County. And so that water source is really robust, and it's monitored. It's easy to monitor because it's Basically, how much water does my reservoir have? A lot of planning goes into that. We have a great supply there. The other type of water source where I think there's a little more concern is our groundwater supply. So farmers and ranchers in Placer County are allowed to use groundwater wells to irrigate their crops. And a couple of years ago, the state put in a plan called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And what that requires is for the county to, along with other partners like the city of Roseville and Placer County Water Agency, et cetera, to come up with a plan, hire geologists and say how much water is going into our ground, how much are people taking out of the ground, and basically the net needs to be a gain to where more water is going into the ground, what we call recharge, than is being taken out, to ensure that in the long term we are using less water than is being put into the ground. So basically in perpetuity we're going to have a good groundwater supply, but also continue to use groundwater for beneficial uses like people's homes and growing crops.
Terrific, thank you. Another question, and I think this may be our last question because we do have to wrap up by 7. There are a couple of questions about development which we will follow up on, but the question is, are there any genetically modified crops in Placer County, and if so, where or what they might be?
There's cow petting questions. Yeah. So I think the short answer is probably yes. That is not something we actively monitor or regulate. There's no requirement that a farmer register with the county or the state and say, I'm growing a GMO crop. Kind of where you draw the lines on what you consider GMOs is a little bit, that's open to debate as well. And so that's kind of a much longer conversation, I would say. But in short, we don't regulate it, and I couldn't tell you today how many farmers or who's doing it.
Okay, and Roop wants to add to that.
So strictly on almonds, typically historically you had a male and a female. Male pollinates the female. That's the need of the honeybees. And honeybees make up on those traditional plantings 15% of the total operating cost for an almond orchard. So just wrap your head around that for a second. Chemicals, fertilizers, labor, all of that, 15% of our costs are bringing the worker bees in to pollinate our field. So the other reason why Placer County is growing in terms of almond trees is 2 reasons. One, to go to the water question. On average, up in this region, call it over 50 years, we get about 22 inches of rainfall a year. With that, a lot of that rainfall happens in about February when we need pollination. So that impacts our agricultural production. So rule of thumb, we factor in about 2,200 pounds to the acre for almond trees here. Now, my colleagues down in Madera County, Fresno County, they get 5 inches of rainfall per year. And so they can control their ground. They got great pollination weather, but they're operating at a water deficit because they're pumping more than they're using, or they're pumping more than that's being replenished. So that's why they got subsidence and their ground is actually dropping, and there's some cool images online. So here, the water fundamental is awesome. The GMO question is to limit the impact of the pollination. We've actually, the majority of trees going in Placer County are called independent variety. So they're not males or females, they're asexual, they're self-pollinating. So now that allows us to compete with our colleagues down south. So that technological advance coupled with the rootstock technological advance, which is probably 7 to 10 years ago, where we have heavier clay soil and a lot of rain. So a lot of almond trees would die here because you had these peach rootstocks that can't tolerate that heavier soil with the rain. But now you got these plum hybrid rootstocks that can survive in wet years in clay soil. So those are just some of the technological advances that have allowed this region to grow. But the independent variety, and I had to research this because certain countries like Japan and the EU will not buy GMO almonds. So I said, hey, it's great to have independent variety, but are these genetically modified or not? And the quick answer after researching it a lot is they were actually found in nature and propagated, so they weren't genetically modified, so they're non-GMO. So hopefully that gives some more insight into some of this.
That's great. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
The one thing I would add, though, is kind of just an overview comment about this evening, and I think that it's that farmers and ranchers, at least in Placer County and probably in California in general, are willing and able to provide those answers to you if you have questions. And there are a lot of dangerous resources out there that you can go find. It's sort of like if you have a sore throat and think you might have cancer, don't Google it. Same thing with farmers and ranchers. I mean, there's not a lot of mystique there, or maybe there is. I show up with my belt buckle, but I still put my pants on one leg at a time, and we're still people willing to have this partnership with the people in our communities. And I have a similar story about cattle. I mean, we sell genetics and service is what I say, and I didn't get into that because the nuances don't matter in this particular crowd, but the chances of you folks buying a hamburger out of one of our animals are relatively slim. But our customers who buy their genetics from us through a bull or female, there is a chance you could get a steak off of them. And so am I actually going in there and having someone making franking cows and cutting out genes and putting them in? No, we're using different breeding techniques and finding different populations in nature to introduce that'll thrive in this region with the least amount of inputs that are available, because we know, like Rupe's slide said, we have to do more with less to feed this population. But I just want to say on the behalf of the farmers on the panel, thank you all for investing in your future here in Placer County and being here tonight. And thank you to the supervisors for putting this on.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you all online for joining us. We're going to wrap this up. A couple of you had questions about development, and we'll follow up with you. And I think the last slide, if you need to contact any of us, feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer any questions. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. I think there might be some more pumpkins you might grab on the way out. And have a wonderful evening. Thank you for supporting us.